Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's webinar. First things first, a bit of housekeeping from our side. You will notice that you are muted for the duration of today's webinar. However, if you do have any questions at any point, please do feel free to log these in the little question box on the GoToWebinar pop-up. I'll be more than happy to tackle these at the end of today's session, and you will also be sent a link to view the recording afterwards. So please no panicking if you miss even the tiniest shred of information today. Now, let's get going. So there's been a lot of information that you've probably received over the past few weeks and months and even years on how to overcome data compliance challenges. But short of deleting all of your data, much like PubChain Weatherspoons did here in the United Kingdom, there's no foolproof way of actually making sure you're protecting all of your data everywhere, all of the time. Here at Redgate, we don't believe there is any silver bullet to, for lack of a better word, fix these issues, but we do believe in a few golden principles that we have collated, worked on, and seen in practice, which will certainly help build your defensible position. Whether you're justifying your data protection activities in terms of legislation, such as the GDPR here in the EU, SOX, HIPAA, POPI, PIPA, all of these wonderful acronyms, or if you're just trying to do your due diligence to protect your customers and clients. It is these golden principles and ideas that we'll be discussing today, and how you and your teams can be instrumental in slaying the data compliance dragon and getting to the ultimate treasure, DevOps for the database. So my name is Chris Unwin. I'm actually going to be your presenter for today. My background is in SQL Server development, management information systems, and ERP configuration. And I've been here at Redgate for about 3 years now. And what a journey it's been. Heaven knows how they still put up with me. So a little bit about Redgate before we get going. There's about 230 of us, and we're about 18 years old. So we have been going for quite some time, active largely in the SQL Server and Oracle communities. We have about 202,000 customers, which actually I think that number is out of date, and it's probably more towards 250, if not 300. And of those customers, that's just companies. So there's around about 1 million people using Redgate tools worldwide. We're big fans of practicing what we preach, and certainly the culture here is one of DevOps. Now, we certainly aim to get as many product releases out of the door as we can each year. And last year, you'll see we made just over 1,100 product releases, which is pretty good going. Big fans of sponsoring the community as well. We sponsor a load of user groups and charities locally as well. So we like to do our part. Now, data breaches. Something I find myself saying more and more, and not just because I've been running webinars on it, is that a company's data is one of its most valuable and important resources. Managing and protecting that data are big responsibilities. And now more than ever, a data governance process must be put in place to avoid misuse and to meet those regulations. In the last webinar I presented, my colleague Chris Kurzweil and I discussed this quote that you see before you now, and how we think it really reflects the impact of data breaches. Regardless of which industry they occur in and whom they affect, the loss of personal data is a wounding event that truly calls into question everything that we're storing electronically. Whether this is, like me, offering up simply our email addresses to get the latest newsletter on fancy vegetarian cooking, or whether it's actively entering our personal and financial information into a website to buy the latest gadget or doodad. The associated data and profile that's generated as a result of this is crucial, highly sensitive, and must be treated with the utmost care. But it's still happening. we're still seeing data breaches happen on a nearly weekly basis at this point. In the most recent and important data breaches, it reveals just how many ways data can be put at risk. Everybody knows about the Equifax breach. It's almost become as common a household name as Equifax itself, after the company exposed near on 145 million people's sensitive data. But even this didn't spur more companies into action. Most recently, 2 additional breaches have drawn the public eye. So the first of these is a Florida-based marketing and data aggregation firm, Exactis, who suffered a leak which exposed nearly 2 terabytes of comprehensive in-depth data, or in real terms, about 340 million US adults and businesses data. This itself was the direct result of inadequate database protection. So we see across the board it's still happening. The second of such examples was obviously in the financial services industry, and it makes up a good portion of those hit by those breaches. It was the recent threatening of the Bank of Montreal and Simply Financial with a $1 million ransom for the combined 90,000 personal details of Canadians that a group of purportedly Russia-based hackers were able to steal. There's so many ways and so many vulnerabilities in, and really the prize here is just so much higher. So financial services firms are targeted more than any other sector, with breaches tripling over the past 5 years. That's according to the latest report from Accenture. So the consultancy company actually conducted over 2,100 interviews with hundreds of organizations in the UK, the US, Australia, Germany, Japan, France, and Italy to compile its latest cost of cybercrime study. It revealed that the average cost of cybercrime for the sector has actually increased by over 40% over the past 3 years, from $13 million per firm in 2014 to $18 million per firm in 2017. By contrast, the average cost per firm for most other sectors is just under $12 million. So security breaches just continue to plague the financial services. The report continued by stating that the average number of breaches per financial services firm has actually grown from 40 in 2012 to 125 last year. The sector is slightly bigger than global peers, where 130 is the average number of security breaches each year. Again, as we've seen in the previous slide though, the cost of breaches continues to rise. So estimated at about $18.28 million per firm currently. That's an increase of 9.6% in the last year alone. That's something that I personally, I don't know about you guys, would love to see in my pay packet, but that's not a pleasing figure where breaches are concerned. So information loss is one of the most expensive consequences of cyber attacks, particularly in financial services. The greatest impact of cyber breaches on financial services firms are business disruption and information loss, which together account for 87% of the true cost to respond to cybercrime incidents, with revenue loss surprisingly accounting for only 13%. The report actually noted that more can be done with regards to security technologies deployed into financial services, and nearly 2/3 or 60% of respondents' total security costs was spent on containment and detection of breaches. So the foundation of a strong and effective security program is to identify and harden the higher value assets. That's the crown jewels of a business. the assets most critical to operations, subject to the most stringent regulatory penalties, and the source of important trade secrets and market differentiation. Hardening these assets makes it as difficult and costly as possible for adversaries to achieve their goals and limits the damage they can cause if they do obtain access. So ultimately, what we need to do is limit risk and limit damage. So what can you do to ensure your database development process is secure and compliant? Well, at Redgate, we would recommend you start by answering these 4 questions to start your journey to compliant DevOps process. And this isn't tools focused. Absolutely, tools can help us get there, but these questions are the very top of this list. So where is your data? Where actually is it? Where is it physically located? Do we have a bunch of servers and databases that exist elsewhere on the network or even on external networks that we just don't know are there? It's entirely possible, especially when we're just restoring databases all over the show. There's plenty of reasons that data could exist, even backups, for example, they could exist elsewhere that we're not aware of. And this is crucial to understand because we can't take the step of protecting our data if we don't know where it is. You can't protect something you don't know exists. The next one, what exactly is it? Great, okay, once you've got an understanding of where all of your data is, actually going through it and building up almost a catalog of what type of data this is. Is it sensitive? Is it general data? Is it headless, financial, or market data that we can utilize for some BI purposes? Or is it a bit more sensitive than that? Is it maybe some names? Is it email addresses? Are these things that relate to specific individuals? Or is it potentially even more sinister than that? Is it data that's so sensitive, perhaps information that's related to vulnerable adults or children? This sort of information, we have to ask our question of ourselves as to how we're going to protect this moving forwards. But of course, we can't protect it moving forwards if we don't know where it is and what it is. The next one is who is accessing that data and for what purpose? Now, we can't easily give everyone access to all of our different environments, including production, because that's just way too much risk and we need to lock it down. But equally, we can't restrict everyone from accessing that data because if we do that, it could interrupt other business activities. So we need to figure out what data we can give people, what can be locked down, and what necessary rules we have to put in place, what necessary processes we have to put in place. And finally, how can we demonstrate once we know where it is, once we know what it is, and once we know who is getting access to it? How do we demonstrate that if a customer asks? How do we demonstrate that if an auditor comes into the company? Again, something that's very prevalent in financial services is auditing. And if someone comes in and says, how are you protecting your data? That is something we have to try to explain. Now, how does this fit into the wider picture of actual software delivery? How does this plug into development? Well, as an example, the EU's GDPR specifies that if you have a general obligation to implement technical and organizational measures to show that you have considered and integrated data protection into your processing activities, or as it says, data protection by design and default. One of my new favorite ones to call out, something very, very recent, is the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. And that actually states that if the business has failed to implement and maintain reasonable security procedures and practices appropriate to the nature of the information to protect the personal information from unauthorized disclosure, then they are liable. And the thing I think that is fairly common across both of these is the fact neither specifically calls out just implementing stronger firewalls or indeed even implementing just technical measures alone. They both identify the need for organizational and process change to bring about better protection of data. This is the same thing that Redgate as a company has seen as a necessity to adopting a DevOps culture until now. And compliance is a piece of that puzzle. Literally, they are two cogs working together. Like Donovan Brown at Microsoft says, it's the combination of people, processes, and tools that must see the revolution, and not just one or two of these areas. Having a repeatable, reliable process from end to end gives you a good foundation from which to build your own defensible position around data privacy and protection, regardless of what legislation you're trying to adhere to or how you're trying to prove your compliance. Whether it's tracking changes to the underlying tables themselves in which the data is stored, i.e. someone adding a new column which ultimately will be deployed to production and will start collecting sensitive data without us potentially knowing. Or monitoring the databases and servers where these tables are stored, i.e. being able to pick up unusual activity or say backups being put in unusual locations. DevOps and compliance go hand in hand to ensure that you're able to deliver value to these end users and customers without compromising on good data protection practices or vice versa. So very quick case study for you. Paymentsense is actually the UK's largest merchant services provider. Its contactless card machines and online payment services provide 50,000 small to medium enterprises with a simple, low-cost way to process over £5 billion in card payments every year. That's in store, online, over the phone, on the move. And behind the scenes, a team of 20 application and database developers based in the UK and 4 others who work remotely, they look after all of these financial services applications with over 80 databases in their development environment and 15 in the production environment. To speed up their development, the team has actually adopted a full-on DevOps approach and has a unified development, testing, and deployment process for both applications and databases. Previously, they were waiting and waiting and waiting for database copies to be provisioned for them. So disk space problems were disrupting work when developers wanted a fresh database copy, and the developers couldn't rely on test results to reflect accurately the behavior in production. Now, thanks to them working with Redgate, they've managed to put in place the mindset. They've managed to enact that change in people, in processes, and again, thanks to Redgate tooling. And they've actually cut their time for database provisioning by more than 85%. So, what are those steps to achieving compliant DevOps that go along with those questions we asked of ourselves? Well, the first thing is to discover all of that information. We need to save time mapping our SQL Server estate. We need to gain some insight into our databases. And we need to determine where we have personally identifiable information. Ultimately, we need something that will provide a window into our SQL Server estate. We'll auto-discover anything that exists or is within our remit. And ultimately, who has access to what? What is their permission level? Following on from discovery, we need to classify information as well. We need to completely remove the guesswork. We need to give data context. And ultimately, we need something, some kind of tooling or process that allows us to label our servers, databases, tables, columns, using a taxonomy that's aligned to existing Microsoft taxonomy, and being able to look at simple reports of just where is our data and what is it. Now, fortunately, here at Redgate, we are running an early access program. You heard it here first, folks. So please do feel free to come onto the Redgate website and look under our data classification section, and you'll be able to sign up and actually try out this brand new tooling that Redgate's bringing to market, where we enable you to go through and classify this information for an entire estate. Now, the next step, once we've discovered and classified all of our information, is of course to protect it. Well, fortunately, with Redgate, we have a few ways of looking at this. So we want to safeguard against data breaches and unauthorized access. We need to automatically apply masking rules when provisioning these new databases. And we need to ensure our business critical data is kept safe. Now, fortunately, again, this is an area that Redgate comes in strongly with a couple of offerings, SQL provision and SQL backup, which allow us to replace sensitive data, create these SQL Server database copies in an instant, and of course, compress, strengthen, and encrypt backups. So something that's very prevalent in the GDPR and other legislation is how long are we holding on to information? Is it being processed for any purposes that it shouldn't, or any purposes that the data subject hasn't given their express consent for? By using something like SQL provision to anonymize and provide these pre-production environments, we remove them from the scope of any of this legislation. And with SQL backup, we can define those meaningful retention policies as well. This is just headless financial data. We'll hold on to it for 90 days. This is sensitive information, really sensitive information. We'll hold on to it for maybe 30 days. And we can set all of that up in the tool automatically. Sometimes it's more important to look at what third-party tooling can offer, purely because of the auditing and reporting functionalities as well. Now, we also need to make sure that as part of this entire process, we're keeping an eye on where all of that data sits. Like I mentioned, actual availability of our own data, the ability to see when something is misbehaving, is key. So something like Redgate SQL Monitor would allow us to proactively monitor our estate and be alerted to these incidents. With its brand new estate tab, something that you can actually see for yourself if you go to monitor.red-gate.com. You can have a play around and see exactly what it offers. But essentially, we get access to these up-to-date reports as to what sort of uptime or downtime we're having on particular servers. We're able to be alerted to high urgency cases where an instance is unreachable, for example. Now, there's also the brand new estate tab on there as well, which shows us all of the versions of all of our SQL servers across our estate. Most recently, the UK's ICO actually came out and said that failure to patch software that results in a data breach is in itself a punishable offence, or something that will be definitely taken into account when compiling that evidence, because that is entirely up to us to do. So fortunately, this group of Redgate's data privacy and protection tooling allows us to better prepare our software delivery. And as I mentioned earlier, we can actually create a data firewall, as it were, something that allows us to ensure that we're applying relevant access controls to only necessary people. As you see before you in this particular slide, the DBA, the person who should have the access to production data, does. But then developers and testers who just need a more general idea of what production looks and tastes and feels like, They're only getting desensitized information in pre-production, but it's still useful. But ultimately, how does all of this matter? Why does it matter? What exactly are the benefits to financial services to adopt this particular process? Why does it matter, and what does this mean for you? Well, we can mitigate potential security threats. In the initial days, DevOps practices were seen as major risk to security. They were the black arts, and the enhanced velocity of software releases it allowed was viewed as a threat to security, governance, and regulatory controls. In spite of the initial setback, some enterprises that adopted DevOps have shown consistently that these practices actually reduce potential security problems and help companies locate issues and tackle threats more quickly. The last thing we want to do is have a rollback in production where we accidentally cause the loss of sensitive data, for example. Due to this, many companies have embraced the automation practices that enable and enforce compliance, security, and audit requirements. Today, financial services companies increasingly view DevOps as a resource for security. We're also able to automate all the processes. Automating all of these processes through the delivery pipeline is another essential to enhancing resource utilization, product quality, and developer productivity. And this allows cross-project and enterprise scale management and visibility across the services that the companies offer. For any continuous delivery or DevOps initiative, actually automating the process is becoming a major requirement for enabling scalability and speed, which ensures compliance and achieving higher product quality. DevOps actually offers enterprises with an efficient approach to alleviate risk from software releases and aid the ever-evolving demand for frequent application updates. Something that all of our customers want is, a better offering, something that is a bit more tangible and something they can see changing. By managing all of these release processes in a single centralized platform and automating the complete end-to-end pipeline, the companies gain visibility into the progress of all DevOps processes and releases and make sure they can optimize, govern, and control their delivery pipelines even as they and their companies evolve. Ultimately, this drives cultural transformation. DevOps focuses on creating an environment and a culture where the business operations, quality assurance, development, and other stakeholders work collaboratively towards a shared goal. While optimizing the technology and tools to scale DevOps adoption, embedding security practices and automating the lifecycle are really major steps. Like we said before, DevOps is a mindset, and any change in culture does take time. Now, the implementation of DevOps is spreading rapidly in financial services due to the value that this global systems level approach enables. It allows us to scale the latest IT process across the entire organization, and that creates a robust pathway to production, a robust pathway to better value. By eliminating the friction between the teams, maybe taking them out for a coffee, and breaking down these functional silos by orchestrating every aspect of the software delivery pipeline, creating a repeatable, predictable process which operates frequently with minimal interruption. And that prevents many of the challenges that large and distributed companies actually face. Finally, we need to reduce our operational costs and increase financial performance. So cutting costs through data governance can be achieved by eliminating duplicate processes and issues associated with poor data quality, as well as reducing administrative costs by defining clear roles and responsibilities for data management, mapping it through that process flow. These benefits can also help to maximize the profits for any financial services organization. So to sum that up, compliant DevOps implementation eliminates, or at least minimizes, the security risk before they become a major threat and scale that to the IT processes across the whole enterprise. Every day, more organizations are switching to compliant DevOps and not looking back. The change to DevOps culture may take time, but it will revolutionize the activities of your organization, including very much so in the financial services, where we see the hunger for growth and the hunger for scale, whilst retaining the security of our sensitive data. Like we said, these are the golden principles: discover, classify, protect, monitor. Regardless of what tool set you do decide to use for this, it's ultimately important to follow through these steps and realize that they're actually an iterative process. Once you've done it once, it just carries on. We need to continually discover, continually classify, continually protect, and continually monitor to make sure that we're doing everything on our side to protect our data subjects. Like I say though, Redgate does offer plenty of solutions in this area, and we'd be more than happy to have a chat with you about anything you've seen today or any other concepts that might be important to you. So one final word then from a company who practice exactly what we've been talking about today. AFA Forsikring, I hope I said that right, that's AFA Insurance, who are wholly owned by Sweden's labour market parties, provide a range of insurance policies and financial support to over 4 million employees in both the public and private sector, covering incapacity for work due to sickness, injury, shortage of work, death, parental leave. It manages assets of approximately 200 billion Swedish krona. That's approximately 24 billion US dollars. So at the time, 5 development teams were managing around 70 servers and 400 databases on the Microsoft platform alone. And they looked after 2 online systems, handling up to 130,000 logins per week. Keeping all of that technology performing at optimum efficiency is the team's biggest challenge. They started working with Redgate tools originally to resolve conflicts between its development, testing, pre-production or acceptance, and production environments, putting in place that deployment pipeline. As well as increasing the number of deployments tenfold, the team at AFA have actually seen a substantial time saving as well, freeing up the equivalent of an additional team member. And now that deployments are streamlined, the DBA can actually spend time managing performance optimization, doing something that DBAs want to do. Not only have they removed most, if not all, of the risks associated with an archaic manual process, but have also dramatically increased their productivity by, again, inspiring that mindset by changing people, by changing process, and by changing tooling. So it's at this point that I'd like to invite anyone to add any additional questions that they have. We have had a couple of questions come through. I'll tackle those in just a second. But if you do have anything that you want to ask about the Redgate tooling or about anything that's been mentioned here today, please feel free to type that into the question box now. So the first such question we had is, you've mentioned that Redgate provides tooling to help tackle these challenges in SQL Server, but what about unstructured data or other relational database management systems? That's a really good question. So Redgate obviously provides some tooling on both the SQL Server and Oracle sides, and even a couple of tools on the MySQL side as well. Now, we understand that you can't solve everything by making sure that your database is secured, that you know where all of your information is. But we are a piece of the puzzle. So across SQL Server and Oracle, we're able to look after that particular headache. Yes, we don't solve the unstructured data, the Excel and Word documents that you may have lying around on the network, but at least this is one part that you can stop worrying about as much, and it allows you to get on with other tasks, such as handling that unstructured data. The second question we have is, we have quite a few fields in our database tables that are heavily required for our development and test teams that we can't afford to lose as part of the process. If we adopt masking as part of SQL provision, do we have to scrub all of our columns or just the sensitive data? Again, that's a really interesting question. So as part of the masking process, you're able to define individual columns and how they should be masked as part of your due diligence, and that allows us to define better data, essentially more usable data specific to that column. Now, because you choose column by column, anything that's not personally identifiable, either directly or by correlation with other data, can be left. If you really want that peace of mind, then you can shuffle it between rows, but ultimately you can still hold on to it so that it's so that it retains its demographic and so that it retains its usefulness. But you're only effectively scrubbing just the personally identifiable or protected health information. We haven't had any other questions, so that's absolutely not a problem. Obviously, if you do have any questions after today's webinar, you can definitely get in touch with us, and I will leave the contact information on the slide at the very end of this webinar. But one final note before we do end, I should point out we have another webinar in our Compliant DevOps in Financial Services series, which you can actually see, I think it's next week, Thursday, the 26th of July. Details are on the slide right now. You can go and sign up completely free. And it's diagnosing issues within SQL Server in 5 minutes or less, utilizing that monitoring technology that we discussed earlier in today's webinar. So I'll just leave that up for a few more seconds in case anyone wants to jump to that particular site. And that's all for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to contact us on the information on screen at the moment, and we'll be absolutely more than happy to help out moving forwards. But besides that, have a fantastic rest of the week and a great summer.